thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Welcome. We look forward to having a great discussion with you all. And I want to give a special thanks to Emmy Action for co-hosting this event. We have a special greeting from Ady Barkan that I just dropped into the chat. Check it out when you have a moment. My name is Terri Wilder, and I am a person with Emmy, and I will be the moderator for our panel discussion. Aaron and Lori of Emmy Action will also be helping this evening. So now I want to briefly introduce our panelists, and I'm going to put folks' bios in the chat. So the first person I want to introduce is Nick. Nick, if you want to wait. So Nick is a filmmaker and producer, and he has produced a number of films. The film that you just watched, he directed. So thank you so much, Nick, for being with us tonight. Tracey, who's with us as well, is an activist and a subject in the film you just watched. She is the campaign director for Action Center on Race and Economy. Policing incarceration and tech work is what she works on. She comes to this work as serving as a social worker, electoral campaign organizer, and a political strategist. So welcome, Tracey. So for some reason, it won't let me put your bios in the chat. I think there's too many text box limitations, but we can send it out later. So I want to start off by asking a question to Nick. So Nick, the film is absolutely beautiful. And the 2 times that I've watched it, I have cried like a baby. As an activist myself with a chronic disease, it's important to me that our stories be told in respectful and honest ways. And I wonder if you can talk about how and why you became involved in this film.
Sure. Thank you, Terri. Thanks for having me. I'm inspired and grateful to be able to show the film to fellow activists, and to be here with Tracey is such an important and integral part of this story that never would have happened without her. And the movie began in early 2018 when I got a call from Liz Jaff, who everybody in the audience will now recognize as Ady's partner in crime, who met him fatefully that day on an airplane in a moment that is really stranger than fiction. Nobody could have written the fact that a political consultant looking for her next big candidate would be next to the plane on the guy who would become the most powerful future activist in America. And the reason she called me is that I run a video production company that does short films for social movements, for progressive organizations. We work for Greenpeace, for Black Lives Matter, making short videos that support those causes. And I've always been an activist and a filmmaker, and I've always made my kind of career and day job, so to speak, into figuring out how I can make videos to support causes and candidates that I care about. And Liz and I were connected through a mutual friend, and she said, hey, I just met this guy on an airplane. We need a short film to launch our healthcare organization. And I was like very confused by the whole thing. But I watched the Twitter clip of Ady confronting Jeff Flake and saw all the news about it and thought, as the whole world did, how incredible it was. And I said, of course, let's make your promotional film. And I flew out to Santa Barbara to meet Ady. The moment I met him is basically in the movie. It's in the opening credits. I was starting to get ready for the interview, and Rachel was changing his shirt, and he was joking about his abs and everything else that you get to see and love about him. And I just had this like immediate spark with him that this person was going to change my life, and that this was going to be something incredible. And at the end of the first interview for that short promotional clip that we were going to make together, I said, Ady, let's record some more stuff for what might be something longer that we would do together. And the reason I had to do that is because, as you can see from that clip and really where the movie begins, Ady had already been sick for a year when I met him. And he only spoke for about 6 months from the day I met him to the date when he got the voice machine. And so there was this incredible urgency to tell his story. And there wasn't like a long courtship process. I was basically like, all right, Ady, I'm gonna be back next month. And then when he told me that him and this crazy badass group of activists, Tracey included, were getting on the road with him, I knew that it might be a feature film. But of course, I never could have expected all the twists and turns that you see later in the story. I thought maybe it would end with the 2018 election, but we can talk more about that and the rest of the story.
Cool. Thank you. And I just want to mention for everybody, I have my ABBA t-shirt on as a shout out to Ady and Carl. um, one of my colleagues, Carly, said that ABBA means father in Hebrew, and I thought it was because Carl liked the 1970s band ABBA, so I changed my shirt really quick. Anyway, I have a goofy sense of humor, so there it is. Tracey, I was immediately drawn to you in the film. And I want to ask you, what is your philosophy around activism? And what do you think is the most important strategy people can use when speaking truth to power?
Yeah, that's such a amazing question. And I like reflected on it for a long time when I saw it. And I was like, what is my philosophy? And I really think that activism is like our calling and the calling to people who care about other people. And it's really that simple. Like if you care about other people and what happens to them, you become an activist, and that's in whatever way. So sometimes that's like being like Ady and kind of putting yourself on the line every day. And sometimes it's people like my mom. There was a question about like in the chat, I know we'll get there, about what would you tell someone from the South? And I'm like, my mom is actually that person who is not confrontational and thinks what I do is very wild. But she was an activist for me and for my peers as a mom in schools and part of the PTA. So I think that it's really, for me personally, has been like a calling and something that I couldn't let go. So you alluded to me starting my career as a social worker, and I've continued to ask myself, like, what is next? What more can I do, and what more am I supposed to be doing? And so I started working for candidates. And I saw that they weren't actually doing the things that we needed them to do. They weren't doing the things to keep people like me alive. They weren't doing things to help people like me thrive. And so I was like, well, what's the next step? And I think I'm continuing to chase that, to continuing to figure out what is the next step in my journey of caring for myself and caring for other people.
Thanks. Were shown doing this amazing bird dogging training, and we at Emmy Action several years ago had like bird dogging training by Jaron Benjamin, which I then found was in your film kind of discussion guide, and I was like, wait, that's us.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you specifically, because a lot of us living with ME, people living with long COVID, because of the limitations of our disease, a lot of times we can't show up physically, but our whole philosophy at ME Actions, but we can be really powerful through tech and media. And I'm wondering, in what ways does like posting political encounters on social media, as we witness in the dogging training scene, impact issues of accessibility?
I mean, I think that social media is so important. Ady, we wouldn't know who he was if it wasn't for that video going viral. I think the pandemic really showed how these can be things that are done at home as well. Meetings were shut down, and so you would have people essentially like Zoom bombing politicians and asking questions. You would have people actually doing videos from home and tweeting at political figures and asking them why they weren't doing more. So I think that all of that is important, and there's like an escalation of activism. And so everyone isn't going to be someone who confronts people. Sometimes you might be a person who makes a phone call and actually talks to your like the official one-on-one or like somebody from their office. And so I think that it is what you feel comfortable with, and then pushing yourself to what you feel comfortable with next. And like I said, during the pandemic, we saw that those things could be done from home as well.
Got it. Nick, we talk a lot about the power of storytelling in the ME community and the long COVID community. And, your film is you being a storyteller. And I would love to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned in your career as a storyteller that you think we, as people living with disabilities and chronic disease, could all benefit from as we tell our stories to the world?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's really in this film what I would say, and it's in that moment when I watched that clip from Ady confronting Jeff Flake before I even knew that there was a movie here, which was the most powerful and effective piece of healthcare storytelling of 2018 was captured by Liz on that cell phone with those headphone microphones. And that translates across movements. The most powerful moments of storytelling in the Kavanaugh confirmation also played out on news cameras, but also cell phones capturing Anna Maria in that elevator. And so I, of course, think that the power of long form cinema can do incredible work in terms of building bonds and empathy. But what I think is so unbelievable what this film subtext is about is that the tools for storytelling are in everybody's hands. You don't need to go to film school. You don't need to have a X, Y, and Z type of camera or lighting. And I found that incredibly empowering. And one of the reasons I wanted to make the film was not just because Ady has a great story, but because of what Ady and Tracey and the rest of the Be a Hero team did, which was go around the country and tell people that they could be storytellers. It was this whole movement of storytellers. It's really not about Ady's story. And so I think, you know, from my career and from this film, I've learned that, it's a metaphor for Ady's fight. You make do with the tools that you have. And I think, I hope that the film conveys that message of empowerment. You can tell you don't have to be on TV. You can do it on the street. You can do it at their offices. You can do it from bed. And you can do it even if you're sick and even if you're disabled and even if you can't move your hands. Ady's doing this with his eyes. And so I think the message, and some people have said this in the chat, and I feel the same way. It's kind of like, what's your excuse? If Ady's doing it, so can you. So that's what I think about this. And one thing I would just mention, I said this before, Terry, but I think it's like important for this group before we started talking, is that we did a panel with Jim Lebrecht, who is the director of the documentary Crip Camp, which everybody should see. I think it's one of the most powerful documentaries on this issue, but on disability rights activism and on any issue. And he said during the Q&A that back during the ADA movement in the 1960s and 70s, when some of the disabled people in San Francisco were occupying City Hall and tying their wheelchairs up to the doors until ramps and other basic kind of infrastructure would be put forward in legislation, not all of the activists could go, and not all of the activists could make it into City Hall because they literally had no way to get there, because they couldn't get transportation, they couldn't get a curb cut, there was no elevators, there was no braille. And so they contributed in other ways. Some of them baked cookies that would be sent to the activists, to the occupiers that were spending the night shutting down City Hall. And I feel like there's a really important metaphor, one for film in general. I feel like this film and others like it, like Unrest, are like those cookies. It's a tool to nourish and heal and inspire and motivate the people who are doing the actual work, which is all of you guys. It's Tracey and Terri. It's not us filmmakers. And it's a lesson about how people can contribute in different ways. For some people, I think it's picking up a movie camera. For others, it's picking up a cell phone. For some, it's protesting. And then for others, there's a million ways that all of us from home, I think even, or especially as I'm learning more about the ME community and certain ways that the challenges that they might have in going out and protesting, but there are so many other ways to contribute. Look at Ady and how he does that. So that's something I just wanted to share in terms of how I think about the intersection of storytelling and activism.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, if we look at the metaphor of theater, backstage and front stage, somebody is going to be up front, the camera's going to talk to them or they're going to be interviewed, but we need the person who is super organized and can figure out how to get the buses or to get the letter written or to get the tweet out. And, those people, you may never know who they are, but they're like critical to the whole package of what you're trying to achieve. Before I move to the questions that are coming in from the audience, Nick, you mentioned something, and I want to hear both Tracey and your opinion and thoughts about this. You mentioned Anna Maria. And one of the things that I've thought about a lot is, we're a lot of times very focused on our own issues. So like fighting for healthcare equity for people with ME. We have no FDA approved drugs. Like, the federal government has been, it's an understatement to say how disappointing they've been and how disruptive of their lack of attention has been to our lives. But they're in collective liberation and in working in coalition and being respectful of all of our fights. And I want to talk about that very powerful scene in the film where Ady steps back so Anna Maria can share her experience as a survivor of sexual assault during the Brett Kavanaugh nomination. And I just want to talk about, in what ways does Ady or any activist, and in this case, Ady prioritizing Anna Maria's testimony, really highlight these dynamics of intersections of power, privilege, and identity that would offer models for activists engaged in different, though interconnected struggles for justice.
Wow.
Tracey could take a pass. I think, for me, I'll just say as a filmmaker, and I really think Tracey should do the talking about the activism. And so I just, for me, it was incredibly important to include that scene in the film because it showed that this work is not about ALS. This work is about the power of storytelling, the power of individual voices, the power of raising, each other up and supporting each other in solidarity and intersectionality in creating a more just world. And frankly, that the story is not about Ady, even though he's a funny and great guy that you all know and love, and that Ady will have to pass the torch. And Ady sits on the shoulders of those disability rights activists that I was talking about earlier, fighting for the ADA, and might not have even been able to get into the Capitol in the first place if they weren't there doing that fight 30 or 40 years ago. So it's to me, about that passing of the torch and the intergenerational and intersectional nature of this struggle, which is important to keep in mind, especially in hopeless fights like the Kavanaugh one, where things are really dark and continue to be dark, fights that we lose, and to remember all of the things about that moral arc bending. And so that's kind of why I, as a filmmaker, wanted to include it. And yeah, I'd love to hear, give Tracey the floor on this in terms of, what it means for activists and how they can learn from it, because she's my guru there.
Thank you for that, Nick. So there's so much to take with it. I think that one of the big things I always talk about is how scared I was the first time I started talking to elected officials or people in power. Because I was like, I don't know facts and figures. I don't know numbers. I don't know all of these things that they might know more than me. But one of the things that empowered me the most was knowing that I know my story more than anyone else. And no one can take that from me. No one can know me and the impacts that policies have on me and my family and my community more than me. And so having that has been, I think, one of my greatest strengths in storytelling. And I think that, for moments that are viral, for every Ady and for every Anna Maria, there are hundreds and thousands of interactions like that. The reason Ady Maria was able to have that moment at the Kavanaugh hearings was because we were in the tunnels and in the hallways bird dogging elected officials every day. They were so tired of us. Senators would just see our faces and you could see the exasperation of them just breathing, here they are again. And so we did not let up, and that allowed Anna Maria to have this very beautiful moment that was necessary on that elevator. And so when I think about someone like Ady, I think about just like the level of compassion he has and the awareness he has and the way he tries to take care of us. When you see how funny he is in the film, you know, a lot of we talk about caregiving all the time. Like you see us caregiving for him, but his humor was one of the ways that he cared for us. That he was like, I know this is heavy, I know this is hard, but I'm gonna keep y'all laughing. And I'm gonna put you in front. So there have been times that I have been pushed in front. Like Ady brought me on the trip and was like, oh, you're gonna do this bird dog training and it's gonna be filmed. And I was like, okay. You know, like, so he has been the one who has been so encouraging and pushing us forward to like tell these stories and not make it about him. Even the kind of title of the movie, you know, Not Going Quietly, he talked about the fact that he was going to have to pass this torch and that we were going to have to be a voice for him. And I remember that happening one time on the tour. Anna Marie and I were standing next to each other. It was something that Ady was just really tired and he didn't want to go to. And we were like, you stay. And then we talked about his story and our stories together, and how that built to the policies that we were trying to pass. And we looked at each other and was like, this is a really powerful moment to hear all of our stories together and to remember that it's not just about one of us, but it's about all of us. And it's not talking for Ady in like a patronizing way, but also like sharing our love and respect for our friend and the work that he's done that has empowered us to do more as well.
Yeah, and I also don't think that Ady giving that space for Anna Maria was tokenizing or
No.
patronizing. I think he was recognizing, look, I'm a white man in this world. With that comes a lot of privilege. And, you know, this is not about me. This is bigger than me. And I need to, in this moment, let a woman, you know, a woman from an ethnicity that is constantly beaten down in our society have the mic.
And I'm sorry.
And passing that mic and not being like, oh my God, this is about me. And, you know, I want this, you know, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think every social movement struggles with that. Like, you know, gets the mic, who doesn't get the mic, whose stories needs to be told, who's been marginalized, you know. And I think we all can do a better job of like stepping back and letting other people have the mic.
And I think that it's continuous learning, right? Like there are some things that he instinctively does because he's a great person. So he instinctively would like step aside for Anna Maria. But there are also like learning moments. Like we're not perfect. And I think Ady has really shown himself to be a person that's willing to learn and to grow. There were times on the tour, Nick didn't put them in, that we butted heads and we argued outside in love. And then we were able to move forward and we learned from each other. And so that has been such an important part of our activism as well, that it's not all, we all agree, let's go do this thing together, we're so happy. It's let's have these like really beautiful arguments about how to get this done and then go together as a united front.
Exactly. So I want to kind of switch gears and let the audience have some questions here. So the first question just happens to be for you, Tracey. Not ignoring you, Nick. But the first question is here for Tracey. Tracey, can you talk about what your experience was training people to bird dog for the first time with Ady participating? You know, how is it different, similar from other trainings you've done?
So, fun fact, the first bird dog training I ever did was with Ady there. It was in January of 2018. And there was this thing called Into Action. It was in LA. And someone just like, I think dropped out and they were like, can you do this bird dog training with someone else? And I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And they just gave me a script. And Ady had done a panel beforehand about civil disobedience and why it was important. And I did this training right after with like 250 people. It was the first time I'd ever done it. And then I was like, this is really good. This is like very smart organizing, and kind of immersed myself into it. So the very first time I did it was in a room full of like 250 activists. And they threw me in the front. And Ady was there kind of cheering me on. So um, in the film, it actually was different because it's a smaller room of like 30 people, which I appreciate more because you're able to like have more one-on-one interaction. I'm able to talk to people afterwards and like help people workshop their questions, because it's fun, right? Like it's fun to role play, but the heart of it is like the question that you're going to ask,
Right.
And the way you're going to tell your story in, 3 sentences. And so having a smaller group is like a way to help like do that and workshop those questions with people.
Yeah, I wanted to be in that training, like at that moment in the movie. Nick, question for you. As a director, what did you learn while shooting this about getting the bigger cause message out over a personal story?
Yeah, it was definitely a balancing act. I think that the big thing about the movie to making it work was about exactly that, placing Ady's life in the context of all of these movements and making clear that Ady's message, I think, is about how the personal is political. And that's what this film is about. And that's what we had to do in the edit room, is every time, a lot of things that feel very cohesive in narrative in the movie, as you can imagine, came from hundreds of hours of footage and didn't happen in this exact order. And so we had to be very careful about interweaving the moments with Carl, the moments of rallies, the bird dogging, the calls back home, to show the connection between the way we interact as a society and the way we interact as a family. And that we need to, in my opinion, the subtext for me is the way we treat, I think there's that Cornel West quote about love in public is justice is in public as love is in private. And that I really wanted to come through in the film, that the moments of Ady being able to be home with Carl were made possible by the caregiving that he has and by the healthcare that he has that others are ripped away from. The time that he is away is because of the struggle that he has to fight in order to create a more equitable society for everybody else. And so we wanted the craft of the cinema to mirror that duality of our lives, in that the way we treat each other as a society is reflected in the way we treat the people around us and the people closest to us. And we need to extend that love outside of our families into the way that our society and our democracy is structured. And we do that through our voices and our voting and our activism. And so that philosophy is something that I thought about a lot in editing the movie. What is personal? What's political? What is a family? Is it how do we define those things? And so that is how I would answer that question.
Great. So I have a question for both of you. So, and maybe we can start with you, Tracey. So, utterly compelling storytelling. How do you envision the lessons of this campaign? And I'm assuming the person's talking about Medicare for All, and how do you envision the lessons of this campaign in how they can be applied to other campaigns?
Yeah, I think that goes back to a little bit of your intersectionality question that I didn't answer as deeply, which is a lot of the work I do right now is around abolition and around like safety beyond policing. And I continue to talk about how that's not just about the absence of police, but it's about the presence of all the things that we need to care for each other. So it's the presence of healthcare for all. It's the presence of housing for all. It's the presence of every single fight that my friends and colleagues and loved ones and comrades across the movement are fighting for have to be present for my work to actually be realized. And I think if we all like took that thought, like, I can't have healthcare justice if we don't have environmental justice, right? If we took that approach to understand that all of our fights are interconnected, we would be so powerful. But it's it is in the status quo's like best interest to piecemeal us out and say, okay, I'm gonna take care of this particular like problem for you, but I'm not going to take care of this one over here, so that we continue to be divided. And so I think the lesson from the Medicare for All movement is that in order to have this, like the presence of so many things has to be there to have Medicare for All, and it has to work in tandem with everything else. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite stops on the tour, actually, I live in Oakland, but I'm from Milwaukee. And one of my favorite stops on the tour was a stop in Milwaukee where people were talking to Ady about having healthcare, but not being able to go to the doctor because they couldn't get off of work, or not being able to go to the doctor because they didn't have transportation. And so folks were in and down to talk about Medicare for All, but they were like, but what else? What is the next thing? And so it is incumbent upon us, just like my philosophy of activism is to care for one another and figure out how we can interconnect our fights even more.
Yeah, I hear you.
Love that.
It makes me, Tracey, when you were talking, it makes me think about, while I'm grateful for disability rights activists, from the 70s, 80s, leading us to the ADA of 1990, I am very focused on people understanding disability justice and the principles of disability justice, and that the foundation of that framework was created by communities of color that were overwhelmingly queer. And kind of really pushing to understand the intersection of our lives, but the intersection of what you just spoke to. Like, we can't just care about this thing because they're all connected. You have to care about environmental justice and, health equity justice and all those kind of things because they are interconnected. You cannot pull them apart. Nick, did you have any comments on how do you envision the lessons from the campaign that were shown in the film that can be applied to other campaigns?
Yeah, well, one thing I think is interesting about that is that I don't think Ady himself was particularly interested in healthcare as a focus of his work until he got ALS. And I frankly think, and maybe he would say otherwise, and you should all follow him on Twitter to see what he thinks. I don't think that healthcare is necessarily would be his focus as the number one issue for him now. Of course, it's not to diminish it in any way, but really what I learned from Ady is that it's about that storytelling power that Ady discovered in that moment with Jeff Flake. Oh my God, my voice matters on this issue. Mm-hmm. Right? He was in utter despair. I think, as one could imagine. I think we lost Tracey.
Yeah.
What Ady realized between that moment of diagnosis, where he was really at a low. We don't spend time on that film because on that time period in his life in the film because I hadn't met him yet. But as you could imagine, Ady didn't know if he could be a father to his son with what he was going to go through. And then suddenly he discovered the power of his voice on that plane. And to me, what's really powerful is that Ady has turned his pain into this weapon. And that to me is something that can transcend any issue. It's what Anna Maria does with sexual assaults that she experienced as a child. And to me, that to me is the most powerful lesson that transcends activism, which is that the worst things that happen to us, our traumas, our pain, can be harnessed in this way and turned outward as an act of collective healing. And I find that very incredibly profound. And I think it of course applies to every different disease, but it applies to so many of the social issues that we face. And so in terms of how one issue can apply to another, or how issues can be connected, it's connected to that idea of your story and your pain, the thing that sets you back, gives you this sense of power. And so that to me was really meaningful. And on the disability justice thing, I just wanted to say from a storytelling perspective, I've done two I don't identify as somebody with a disability, although I've done two feature documentaries about intersectional issues. The last film I made, La Americana, is about a woman in Bolivia who comes undocumented to the US because her daughter is disabled in Bolivia. And it's about the intersection of immigration and disability. And I think part of the reason I'm interested in this subconsciously is that my grandfather was blind, and he's from India, and he started the Lighthouse for the Blind in Calcutta. My aunt and uncle, my aunt has CP and was very active in the disability justice movement. And she told me growing up that she was like trotted out for these telethons where they would bring her out in her leg braces, and people would call and raise money for March of Dimes or whatever it was back then in the 1950s, and how incredibly traumatic that was for her. And when I was making my first film, I remember her saying, don't do that with the people if you're filming the people in the wheelchair. And I do feel a very, very deep sense of privilege and responsibility and accountability as a non-disabled person in telling these stories. And I think, it's something that Ady and I talked about and built that trust. And I think Ady felt that way in many ways too, because Ady didn't identify as a person with a disability, and he was entering that community. And I don't think he identifies as a disability rights activist because he hasn't necessarily earned that. And so I think, it's something that I'm sensitive to. I don't think that everybody needs to be from the community that you're telling the story of, but you have to learn about the nuances of how that story has been historically misrepresented and what your role is as a storyteller in doing that authentically. And I don't think there's any right answer to that, nor that I've solved that, but it's just something that informed the process of making this film. And we also did consult with people like Jim Lebrecht and others who were people with disabilities in terms of informing our editorial and creative process to make sure that the representation on screen was authentic. And
I don't know,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Jim helped with Unrest.
Amazing. He's amazing.
Sorry.
I mean, I know I brought him up like several times, but I just think he's a incredible filmmaker and human being.
Is that your phone, or is that something?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It seems like some kind of notification. I'm trying to turn it off. I think it's me. I'm trying to turn it off.
It's okay. I just wanted to make sure somebody wasn't trying to get my attention. Do folks have any other questions? If you want to put them in the chat. I'm hoping we can get Tracey back. I don't know what happened. I know I lost a little bit of power at one point and had to hop off and then hop back in. The other thing, as people are thinking about if they have any last minute questions, is the other thing that I've thought a lot about recently, but then also the film touches on this maybe without even explicitly saying it or even saying it that much. I don't even remember if the word was used, but like ableism in a capitalist culture, and how that impacts our ability to access quality, equitable healthcare. In the ME community, like I think we have 10 to 15 medical providers who are considered experts, and then maybe 2 of them take private health insurance and the rest are cash only. And that has to do with billing. It may have to do with some other things. And it's like, healthcare is an industry that is making money versus, the oath that most physicians, nurses, et cetera, take, do no harm. And, do no harm, I think, extends past to like not giving us, an inappropriate diagnosis or treatment recommendations, to like do no harm to us, making us lose everything that we have trying to pay for our health care. And it's just, people who are kind of more on the anarchist end of activism are like, get rid of capitalism. I don't know how to do that. I think I'm losing everybody. Well, maybe it's time to close. I don't know what's happening. Lori, do we have any other questions from anyone?
We do, but they're for Tracey specifically. So, And I have tried to see. I haven't gotten any message from her, so it may just be time to close.
Okay. Well, I'm so sorry about the tech issues, everybody. It kind of bugged me out. Now I've bugged out Tracey and Nick,
Nick was
and
telling me.
but I'm hoping that this was helpful and important to you to watch this documentary and kind of really dig in and think about some of the issues that were covered and the work that we all do in our own communities. I would also encourage you to, go to the documentary website, read. They have a discussion guide. To read more about that, some of the questions that I pulled from the discussion guide for tonight, they may be just something that you want to journal about, or put some critical thinking into as you think about the work that you're doing in fighting for us to all have health equity. So thank you so much to everyone for joining tonight. It was my pleasure to host this evening. Again, thanks so much to Emmy Action. And it looks like Lori might have some closing thoughts. So, Lori, I can't hear you if you're saying anything.
I was just talking to Nick. He wanted to thank everyone for the thoughtful discussion. He just got logged out and couldn't find a way back in. But he just said it was so wonderful to have such a thoughtful discussion, and he wishes everyone the best in our own activism. And he just wanted to thank everybody again. He was hoping to hop on to say thank you directly, but yes. And I told him we are all big fans of his film. So thank you all for watching, and thank you so much, Terri, for moderating as always.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
See you soon.
Emmy Action and the millions missing. It is great to be here with you all tonight. My name is Ady Barkan, but I guess you all know that now. And thanks to that steamy shower scene with me and Nate, you probably all know me a little too well now. I have so much love and respect for the friends you got to meet in the film, and the wonderful filmmakers, Nick, Amanda, and Ryder, who worked tirelessly to capture the raw and beautiful turbulence of these past few years of the life of my family and our country. Thank you all for being here today, for being here yesterday, and for being here tomorrow, every day until justice is real. I hope that you'll continue the conversation online and in person about how we can shape the future of our democracy through our voices, courage, and our tenacity. And with that, see you on the front lines.